Welcome everyone to Dropkick DiSKussions presented by Sportskeeda. I'm your host Korey Gunz, along with Sportskeeda's wrestling expert Tom Colohue, along with you on this Backlash weekend, Tom.
Yeah, it snuck up on us a little bit, that one, didn't it? Especially with NXT TakeOver last weekend. I do feel that it's weird to have back-to-back pay-per-views like this. So even though they've been building it as much as possible and really pushing it recently, I've heard the greatest match ever riff so many times now that it's burned into my brain that it's constantly approaching.
Yeah, and since you mentioned it, let's start with that NXT TakeOver show that we saw this past weekend. And one of the biggest, or really the biggest thing to take away from that show, I think, is the fact that Charlotte Flair loses the NXT Women's Championship to Io Shirai. She has a very short reign with the title. There's not any real closure in her feud at this point with Rhea Ripley, and it looks like that maybe the Charlotte on NXT experiment is already over, because the very next night on Raw, she plays a very major role in that show. She's in the main event with Asuka. What can you tell us about the plans maybe being changed for Charlotte over on NXT, and do you think that she now assumes the role as Asuka's top challenger?
Well, in regards to plans changing, this is definitely influenced by Becky Lynch not being available. The original plan was for Charlotte to feud with almost all of the women on NXT, at least briefly, and they were building up a few people towards taking the title. Tegan Nox was someone who's mentioned to me as someone who could potentially have been the one to get that rub. Things have now changed. I wouldn't say the experiment's definitely over, even though Triple H has alluded to that. But the women's division on Raw isn't particularly strong at the moment, and it's very heel-heavy. Asuka was switched to face, and Kairi Sane followed suit. However, unfortunately for Kairi, she has once again picked up an injury, so they're not sure how they can use her. Charlotte's unlikely to swap, but we'll see more movement between brands shortly. Hopefully a push for Bianca Belair as well, because there is a lot of heels at the top, faces lower down the card. They need to start feuding with people. Charlotte Flair's an ideal opportunity in that regard. Nia Jax should be available soon as well.
How soon do you think we might see a Charlotte versus Asuka match down the line on Raw then? Do you think that once Backlash is over, we immediately go into that program between the two?
I don't think directly afterwards, because you do still have Shayna Baszler waiting in the wings, and I don't think they want to take her off TV for too long. But the way they're pushing the whole Asuka's never beaten Charlotte certainly says Charlotte's going to be involved. I would not be too surprised to see her added to the Asuka and Nia Jax match at Backlash and make back-to-back triple threat championship matches.
Well, that's interesting. We haven't seen anything announced formally as of yet, but you think that there's a possibility that even this late in the game they could change that into a triple threat for this Sunday?
I definitely do, especially after Charlotte picked up the win on Monday Night Raw. I'm not here saying that it's going to happen, because I don't know if it's going to happen. It's just a personal suspicion that I feel it would be something they might be interested in added to the match. After all, we do have to consider that for quite a lot of people backstage in WWE, they're not the biggest fans of Nia Jax at the moment. So maybe if they had sections of Charlotte Asuka without Nia Jax involved, that would make everyone a little bit happier.
Now, Triple H mentioned on a conference call after NXT In Your House that there was a reason for the finish of the women's match, that, you know, the way everything went down, because I think someone even asked him the question about, you know, the Rhea Ripley Charlotte feud, and he said that, you know, things were planned the way that they were planned for a reason, but it would appear that Charlotte is not going to be on NXT again anytime soon. Or maybe she is. Is Charlotte just going to feud with everybody on all the brands all at the same time?
If WWE had their way, that is exactly what would happen. And to be fair, if Charlotte Flair had her way, that'd be exactly what's happening. But Triple H suggested we'd know the story within 3 to 4 months. Given that Rhea Ripley took the pin and Io Shirai won the championship, that does suggest the feud might be between them going forwards. However, 3 or 4 months is a long time to get to that point. Charlotte's already alluded to the fact that she wasn't pinned or submitted during NXT takeovers. So as far as I can see, that's the story there.
With Charlotte, you know, a lot of people before WrestleMania and the Bill were already talking about that she was too much of the focus in the women's division, that there were a lot of women on the SmackDown and Raw rosters, even in NXT, that should be getting opportunities. And then so she was moved to NXT and then actually took the title off Rhea Ripley at WrestleMania, and people thought, oh, okay, they're going to move the diamond of the women's division and Charlotte Flair, move her over to NXT, which should be something interesting, give a big name over there to get some ratings possibly, and also give the women on Raw and SmackDown a little bit of room to breathe. Now her reign in NXT is over, a month and a half into it, and she's immediately thrust, like we said, into the main event of Raw and into the title picture over on Raw with Asuka. Is there a chance here that Charlotte fatigue is going to set in pretty quickly?
We spoke about Becky Lynch on this podcast taking some time off after WrestleMania. That very much shaped the plan for Charlotte straight away, because pregnancy or not, that was the plan for her to take some time off. And ultimately it was during that time off that she then told the WWE she would be not returning for the foreseeable due to pregnancy. So it was always expected that Charlotte was going to be needed at least for that first month when Becky was due to have time off. That's why they were quite ambivalent as to which brand she was on. But the idea was she would be sticking with NXT. That's now changed. And then, of course, you have her going across to SmackDown to try and rile up things with Bayley and Sasha Banks. Charlotte herself has said that she is a part of other people's stories. I didn't really see her being part of the Nia Jax story this week on Raw, is all I'll say. And I'm not entirely sure she was just part of a Rhea Ripley, Io Shirai story. So maybe going forwards, that's the plan. But for a lot of the fan base, Charlotte fatigue set in a long time ago. I'm a big fan of Charlotte. I don't mind seeing quite a lot of her. However, there are a lot of other people on those rosters, and I think they could really benefit from at least something of a push. Bianca Belair has vanished. Shayna Baszler has vanished. Liv Morgan has been cutting promos, but other than that, has vanished. Where's Natalya? That's just on Raw. Not to mention everything going on SmackDown. I understand if maybe some of them don't want to be back at work right now, or some of them are self-isolating. That is perfectly understandable. But they aren't all doing that. Some of them are just missing in action.
Yeah, and to that point that you just made, with all the names you just listed that are basically being done nothing with, and let's assume, for the sake of the argument that it's not pandemic related, that it's not quarantine related, that all these women are there, ready, willing, and able to work and are simply just not being used. Do you think the WWE and the creative team lean on Charlotte too much, that when things maybe even start to give a hint of being stale in the women's division, the answer is always, we'll throw Charlotte out there and that'll fix it, instead of giving some of these other women a chance to kind of rise up and grab the brass ring, as we hear a lot of times?
It's certainly possible. They do tend to go back to the more reliable status, which is, of course, Charlotte Flair. And at a point of time like this, when ratings are always going to be down, and if you watch Raw, you saw them constantly try and hook you in before every break with pre-match attacks. Or at one point, Drew McIntyre literally said, stick around, you never know what will happen on Monday Night Raw. They are trying to keep people watching. Charlotte, unfortunately, for a lot of people who are detractors of her, does move the needle. She does bring an audience with her. And while a lot of people will point to a low Raw rating this week, for example, you don't know how low it might be if she wasn't there. Yes, I think they go back to that well a bit too often. Yes, I think now is a perfect time to actually just have faith in some of the newer talent and try and push them. However, they've chosen to go with Charlotte, and that's just where we've ended up.
Last thing we'll touch on, since we're talking about the women's division, this week, on Tuesday night, the Evolution pay-per-view is being broadcast on FS1. Why is that something of note here, that all women's pay-per-view is going to be put onto broadcast television on the Fox affiliate?
Well, there is always a moment where you might assume that it's there just to fill time, and while Fox Sports is looking to get more WWE content, same as ESPN, there is a specific reason that they are showing Evolution. And that is because WWE are going to be watching the viewership for that show, and that's going to be part of the argument for or against an Evolution 2.0. They've been trying to gauge interest for a long time now, trying to see if they can make it happen. They didn't manage it last year. They initially, with the idea that the match between Charlotte Flair and Trish Stratus at SummerSlam last year, they wanted to try and talk Trish Stratus into coming back for another match, and that was going to be sort of a marquee match for the show. When they weren't able to do that, they reconsidered. Stephanie McMahon has mentioned this in interviews before. Now they are looking at trying to relaunch that. Again, Stephanie McMahon is a proponent of this. So they are putting this on. It is going to be followed by Backstage, where they're undoubtedly going to discuss it. Certainly if CM Punk's on that show, he will not let that bit between his teeth go. So I do hope, because this comes out after that has been shown, I do hope that people have watched it, that people have really pushed for it on social media. I've been trying to encourage people to do that, because I have spoken with someone in Fox and they have told me that this is the reason. There is a urge to find out how much interest there is in an Evolution 2.0. And even if there is no intention for an Evolution 2.0 right now, we have seen many times recently that the WWE have changed their mind due to a large amount of fan support.
Well, speaking of WWE changing their mind due to fan support, there may not be a better illustration of that than the fact that this week we saw Drake Maverick re-signed to the NXT brand. Drake was a part of those massive layoffs that we talked about 6 or 7 weeks ago, and a lot of the roster members that were released. He was a part of that, but continued to compete on NXT in the Cruiserweight tournament. And then, as we saw at the conclusion of that tournament, he was actually signed to a contract by Triple H there on NXT. Take us through the timeline of events here between the time that Drake Maverick was released up until the point and that moment that we saw on television where Drake Maverick was officially signed back into the WWE.
Well, almost 3 weeks ago now, the decision was made to offer Drake Maverick a new contract. He was originally supposed to be working as an enhancement talent, but the support he received led to that being changed. By the time he was offered the contract, the triple threat plan had already been lined up, so even if he didn't sign it, he would still be going all the way to the final. He's one of a few people who've been offered contracts at a lower rate than previous, and apparently he's chosen to take it. Personally, I wish him good luck in NXT, as he's someone who thrives on writing his own script, and we've seen that with the 24/7 championship. He won't have that opportunity all that often now he's a full-time NXT wrestler.
So, not to burst anybody's bubble, but that moment that we saw between him and Triple H coming out on the entryway and handing him a contract, having to sign it, that was not a legit surprise moment for Drake. He'd already signed a contract to return to NXT at that point, and that was just kind of part of the show, right?
That's correct. It was a kayfabe moment that was part of the show, and I absolutely have to give them that little bit of credit, because the fact is they were able to keep this one quiet while a lot of things are getting out. I do feel that if this had gotten out beforehand, I was speaking about it beforehand as to it being changed, but I didn't know about the contract being signed. I do feel that may have changed what WWE decided to do. I do feel sometimes with something like this, you have to bite your tongue for the good of the talent there. So while a lot of people were desperately asking me what's going to happen, I did not know. I did not try too hard to find out. I'm not sure I would have been able to anyway. And even if I did, for the sake of Drake Maverick and his contract, I definitely would not have reported it.
Now, it obviously turned out great for Drake Maverick, almost a great comeback story, a Cinderella story, whatever you want to call it. But, there were some people who didn't seem as happy for Drake. There were some competitors on Twitter, Leo Rush being one of note, that were part of those roster releases that were a little bit upset at how all this Drake Maverick stuff unfolded. Do some of the other released talent during those COVID layoffs, do they have a reason to be a little bit upset at the way this all went down?
I would definitely say yes. There is obviously quite a lot of people who were released, and only a limited amount of offers were made to release talent, and none was made to those released from NXT. Quite a few people who asked to leave, or potentially may have been people that WWE wanted to get rid of, they just weren't offered anything. There were some who were offered a release fee, as it were, to buy out their contracts if they had a long-term contract, and the money was apparently quite good. There were also plenty who did not have that long left. Anybody released has a right to be aggrieved by this because they did not have the chance that Maverick had to step back in the ring and really earn that crowd support. Drake Maverick, when he was released, knew he had at least 3 matches and 4 weeks in which to drum that support up. I could not be happier for Drake Maverick personally. I think he's a very entertaining man, but I completely understand why some people are very aggrieved by this.
Was Drake's situation just kind of serendipity that, you mentioned that he knew that he had, even after his release, he had those couple of weeks and a couple matches left to go to maybe try to change some minds or, draw some fan support? And, I definitely understand other people who released thinking that if they had been given that opportunity or if they had been told that they had, hey, you've got 3 weeks to get yourself over, you're going to have 3 matches over the next 3 weeks, that's your chance to, change our minds. That, every person that was released I would think would have thought in their own mind that they have the ability to do that and would have that confidence in themselves to maybe change some heads back or change some minds backstage. So what was it about Drake being given that opportunity and the others not? Was it just happened to be just pure luck that, hey, we need a cruiserweight tournament, you're a cruiserweight, we need bodies, we're going to put you out there even though we know that we're giving you your release, and just things just happened to work out well for him? Why was he different than anyone else that was on that release list?
It was 100% right place, right time.
So there you go. Pretty cut and dry there. Just, I guess good things happening to good people for once. Now, that's not to make light of the other guys and gals that were released and maybe didn't get that opportunity. And one guy who, by his own admission, was left shakingly angry by the WWE after his release was Zack Ryder. Some of our listeners may have seen this or heard this on his podcast earlier this week, but if you follow Zack Ryder on social media or you look at any of his videos on YouTube, and then you watch SmackDown this past Friday, the pool that Mandy and Otis were at might have looked a little bit familiar because that was Zack Ryder's pool. He told a story on his podcast that the WWE actually called, but they actually called Chelsea Green, his fiance, who is still employed by the WWE, to ask if they could use her/Zack Ryder's pool for the segment on SmackDown and come and film it at their house. And Zack Ryder said that, it didn't sit well with him, that he was shakingly mad and angry, that he even had a tweet ready to send about the situation and then decided not to and thought better of it. But come on, you got to feel for a guy that the company fires you and then a couple weeks later calls and asks if they can use your pool for a segment on SmackDown.
I definitely feel for the guy. I'm glad they were eventually able to find somewhere else because I feel confident that Zack Ryder would not have been happy, but it definitely got to the stage where WWE officials were going to scout out the pool. Now, while on one hand they can say, oh, we were asking if we can use our employees' pool, referring to Chelsea Green, I don't think this was particularly intelligent, and it was quite tone deaf when you consider the other people involved here, namely Zack Ryder. But come on, Corey, we both know Zack Ryder has the only pool in Florida.
Go film at a ocean. Go film on the beach. My God, you're showing up at this guy's house wanting to use his pool. And what do you think? Because I think that the odds are pretty good. What's the odds that you think that Vince McMahon didn't even know that Chelsea Green and Zack Ryder are engaged, and somebody just told him, hey, Chelsea lives in Florida, she's got a pool, let's ask her if we can go film at her house, and he didn't even know that Zack Ryder lived there and was her fiance?
I'd say it is possible, and I would say if this becomes a bigger deal, that might be the reasoning they use to excuse themselves.
My gosh, what a story. I said, what a world wrestling is. In and of itself, just in a bubble, just some of the things that happen just amaze me, and I would definitely put this one in the category of things that you might not believe actually happened, but they did. Let's move on now to the Raw side of things and talk about something we learned this week on that was not so fortunate, and that was for Jinder Mahal. He revealed that he actually had to have some additional surgery to his knee, which is what kept him out of action for so long. He had just recently made his return over on Raw, but now looks like he's going to be back on the shelf for a period of time. We've talked a lot on the show the past couple weeks that he was a guy that looked like he was going to be in the position to be given a push as one of Drew McIntyre's next challengers for the WWE Championship, and was a guy that Drew obviously has a history with and wanted to work with. This is just a situation of just some really unfortunate timing, is it not?
It definitely is. It's a very unfortunate situation for Jinder. We've spoken about this at length here. Drew wants to work with Jinder, and I think the fans were finally getting behind this one due to the 3MB connection, especially when you consider how negatively viewed Jinder Mahal was during his WWE Championship run. I really do think it's a real shame.
Will this injury have any cause and effect on Drew's future storylines? Could we see them possibly, assuming that Mahal was going to be that next challenger, now that he's out, could we see them, possibly buy some time by extending the feud with Lashley? Could someone else on Raw maybe get the chance to step up and be that next top heel in Mahal's place? What do you think some of the cause and effects will be for the rest of the roster now that Jinder Mahal is back on the shelf with an injury?
I'd say there's definitely going to be some cause and effect, but it's hard to say what it actually is. Lashley could just get 2 matches because he's slightly ahead of time now, and they might just do that back-to-back before Brock Lesnar comes back at SummerSlam, and that may be the match they go with there. But also, now they've got the brand versus brand invitational, they really haven't used it. We've only seen it used 3 times, twice by Charlotte, once by Baron Corbin. So it's still possible we might get McIntyre Corbin for a month. Who knows?
I'm not sure if I want McIntyre Corbin. If you tell me it's going to last a month, there's a probability it's going to last like 6 months, like Corbin and Reigns did. So that makes me a little bit uneasy thinking about that.
I really do hope Corbin and Reigns is actually finished and we're not just getting a pause. I really do, because it's certainly possible Roman was going to move sideways in that feud, win the WWE Championship, or I believe it's the Universal Championship on SmackDown now, and then immediately get challenged by Baron Corbin. So let's just hope.
Ugh. Well, let's talk about a feud that we might be seeing coming up here soon. If you follow Twitter, you saw a little bit of a testy exchange between Randy Orton and Tommaso Ciampa, throwing some barbs back and forth. Orton had a couple of not so great things to say about Tommaso and NXT, and then Tommaso responded, and then they kind of went back and forth a little bit. Was this war of words? Is that just simply planting a seed for a future storyline? Or was this just a case of Randy being Randy, and he really did just kind of pop off at the mouth on Twitter after seeing one of Tommaso's tweets?
It is a bit of both. It is Randy being Randy, but it's also a seed from the future. This is ultimately how things started with the Revival as well. When Randy Orton has a high opinion of you, he gives you crap on social media. That's how you know he likes you.
What could be thinking behind possibly moving Orton over to NXT? You would think, obviously if this feud happens, one or two things have to happen. Either Orton's going to NXT or Tommaso Ciampa is coming up to Raw, which I guess either could be pretty plausible because, Tommaso has been down at NXT for a while, and I think this would be a cool feud. I think these two guys, their personalities and things go well together. But we talked about kind of the Charlotte Flair in NXT experiment ending maybe prematurely. Could Orton be a big name that's floated down, or maybe not down, but maybe over to NXT and kind of give it another whirl about putting a big name over there on Wednesday nights and giving him a little bit of a run with one of their top guys?
That would be a very bold choice. There's a few people who I think would be maybe better options in there. Daniel Bryan, I think, might be better suited to that. It's unlikely given that it's Randy Orton, and Randy Orton really doesn't have much interest in working in NXT, but there's no doubt that he'd pop a rating. I mean, come on, it's Randy Orton.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I think it would, in my opinion, for me as a fan, it would pop more interest for me than Charlotte Flair being on NXT. I mean, that's just my opinion, but, I mean, he would definitely be a guy that, you would watch on Wednesday nights to see what him and Ciampa would do together, I would think.
Definitely. I would be very interested in that feud, and I think both men could create very good things together. I think this is one of those that even if it never gets to an actual match, it may live long in infamy as one of those tremendous social media feuds that people really latch onto. like Ronda Rousey and Becky Lynch really started out in that regard, or probably the biggest one in the world, that being Batista and Dana Brooke.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I'm going to kind of take a sidebar here off this topic before we finish up, but since you just brought it up, it just kind of came to my mind, especially during this pandemic era, where we don't have as many superstars, in the buildings able to record and everything. Do you think that Twitter and social media is playing even a bigger role as far as advancing storylines? Because, we can't always get these superstars in the building to cut promos. We're seeing more pre-taped promos as it is anyway. So do you think that especially in this pandemic era, social media is taking a big step forward in progressing storylines? Because just like in this example, you have two guys throw some tweets out there against each other, and then voila, you've got a brand new feud that you could have extend for the next couple months.
Oh, definitely. And I think this has been the case for a while. They just haven't really been using it until now when they've been forced to. I mentioned Becky Lynch and Ronda Rousey there, and a huge amount of the heat behind that feud was because of social media. There are people in the WWE who get social media. Rhea Ripley's a perfect example of that. She gets social media. She picks fights. Mick Foley's one who's been jumping in and helping out by being someone to act as a punching bag on social media. Edge was doing the same thing. And in addition to this, you see people who are using it now and learning how to do it. Even recently, Lacey Evans and Sonya Deville, that feud started on social media. Lana may have annoyed some people by trying to get a rematch with Naomi back in the day, but she used social media and she got people behind her. WWE do care about these things. If you have a strong social media presence and you have the fans behind you, you are going to be what they consider to be over. And that is what they care about more than anything. If you had a rabid fan base like Sasha Banks does, for example, a real intense fan base, they know they can make money from you. And that's why they'll keep using you.
Yeah, it's just so interesting to me in today's age that, it's almost kind of like insider baseball a little bit. If you follow social media, if Randy Orton showed up on NXT this next Wednesday and gave an RKO to Tommaso Ciampa, if you follow them on Twitter, you would immediately know why he's there and why he did that to that particular person. If you don't follow social media, then you may have to wait a week before there's a promo cut or something to kind of explain or kind of set up the quote-unquote wrestling angle between the two. But so I just think it's a cool dynamic that it's almost like an expanded universe of the WWE. If you follow social media, you may kind of see things coming a little bit earlier than the general viewer who may only watch what's presented to them on television.
I agree with that, and I think it's a great thing to have in reserve. If they ever have a week where they don't really have much planned for NXT, and AEW Dynamite is literally kicking their ass, send Randy Orton down to give Tommaso Ciampa an RKO.
Yep.
Everyone's changing channel. Well, not everyone, but a lot of people are changing channel at that moment, I tell you that.
Well, let's wrap up the show this week and talk about Backlash, which is coming up this Sunday. I'm going to get your picks on the show, and I want to throw mine out there and kind of see if we have any disparities, and then get your thoughts on if anything kind of jumps out at you or what you're interested in, what you're looking forward to on the show. For my picks, just personally, I've got Apollo Crews over Andrade in the U.S. title match, Bayley and Banks go over in the triple threat women's tag match, Sheamus over Hardy, Asuka over Nia Jax, Strowman over The Miz and Morrison, McIntyre over Lashley, and then I think Edge gets the win over Randy Orton, maybe making way for Orton to make that move to NXT possibly in the greatest wrestling match of all time that we're going to see Sunday. Tell me, what are your picks, who you've got coming out on top in these matches, and then is there anything that kind of sticks out to you as far as things you're looking forward to, or maybe just some interesting tidbits that you're kind of interested to see how the WWE builds on them on the pay-per-view on Sunday?
Well, you see, I come into every one of these previews thinking to myself, okay, we'll talk about the show, we'll talk about who we have to win, and then we'll have a little debate over like why you think this person will win, why this person will win. And then we actually start talking, and it turns out we almost always have the exact same people in every damn spot. And here we are, once again, firmly with the exact same people in every spot. So, using the order you've set out, let me run through. We've got Apollo Crews beating Andrade. I don't think they're going to let Apollo Crews have this shorter title reign. I do think Angel Garza is more likely to be the next US champion before a long-term feud with Kevin Owens. I'm hoping Apollo Crews won't be tossed to the wayside come SummerSlam, but that is a concern that I have. We've talked about Bayley and Banks in a triple threat tag. They would not give them the championship, even though it was a big moment on its own on SmackDown, and then immediately take it away. I doubt they're just transitional champions, because otherwise the Iconics would have won it anyway. It depends how long they want to drag out this Bayley versus Banks feud, because if they are trying to go to SummerSlam, and believe me, they have tried to book this match at every pay-per-view for years, if it is that match that they're planning, they need to get on with it, and certainly there have been suggestions of it. I've got Sheamus over Jeff Hardy. Jeff Hardy won the last one, and Sheamus is being built up towards Braun Strowman. Jeff Hardy's in the latter days of his WWE career. I'm confident he won't be signing another contract there, and I suspect he'll be joining his brother relatively soon. As such, we're probably going to see Jeff Hardy get a little bit buried, and I think he'll be fine with that because it is quite traditional in wrestling. I've got Asuka going up over Nia Jax. Nia Jax very unlikely to win this match, always very unlikely to win this match. It would be a surprise to me if she won, mostly as I've mentioned, there is a lack of credible baby faces at the top of the women's division. Shayna Baszler also is off TV only briefly, but will return once Asuka is available to feud with. And of course now you got Charlotte Flair as well. So Asuka is surrounded by 3 top draw heels. I can't see her losing the championship. We have Strowman over Miz and Morrison. Miz and Morrison aren't winning the Universal Championship. They haven't even explained how they would win the Universal Championship as a team. And also Braun Strowman has literally beaten the entire Raw tag division in a Battle Royal and then won the championships over Sheamus and Cesaro with a 10-year-old. You know what I'd love to see? That kid come back and help Strowman retain the Universal Championship. And I didn't know I wanted to see that until about 10 seconds ago when I started this sentence. Simple fact is, this feud is just killing time until The Fiend returns. Bray Wyatt has gone away because he has just had a child. He wanted to be with his partner. Fair play to him. He wanted to spend time with his child. That means he needed to take some time away to self-isolate, to make sure he wasn't sick, coming back, to quarantine as need be, spend some time with his child and then come back. Chances are we're going to see him back around SummerSlam, so we're just killing time at this point. Finally, I do have Edge going over Orton, because if Orton wins, what was the point of this whole build? And it's so confusing to me. This match has already been filmed. It was filmed before they did the promos last night on Raw. There have been multiple quite brief reshoots, so some spots were filmed 4 or 5 times to make sure they got it right. And there were some clever edits to try and deliver as good a match as possible. But at the same time, a live match such as McIntyre and Lashley could still steal the show. And I've got to say, Drew McIntyre is looking at this as a challenge. And I think he could potentially deliver. At the same time, I have to question the rhetoric used by Christian on Monday Night Raw, saying, "We believe you can do this." Did you not watch WrestleMania? Edge already did do this. Not only that, but he did more than this because it was last man standing, which surely is more intense than a wrestling match, even if it is the greatest wrestling match ever. This is so confusing to me. So I have all exactly the same picks as you. That said, I know this card isn't built to be particularly unpredictable. However, there should be some high quality wrestling. There are some names on here that we rarely see getting these opportunities. Lashley rarely in championship matches. Miz and Morrison are at least in a positive spot. Asuka as a champion is something I've been looking forward to seeing more of. As well as the triple threat tag match, I think will be very good. And it's the only tag match on the card. So we could potentially get a very good card here. And if the Intercontinental title match goes to a non-finish, we could add that. But I doubt they will, because I doubt they want an AJ Styles and Daniel Bryan match on a card where Edge and Orton is supposed to be the greatest wrestling match ever.
Yeah, it's one of my little podcast host tricks is that when we do these previews, I always give my picks first, so that even if we have all the same picks, I just sound smarter because I said it first. So
God damn it.
you're just copying me, So I mean,
I'm stealing your thunder, sure.
Yeah. So I'm just giving you the answers. So that, at least I come out looking like the smart one of the two of us. I will say, we talked a little bit before we started the show about things that stuck out to us about the show, and I agree with you. It's the thing that sticks out to me the most is just how paint by numbers this show seems to be. Not a lot of the matchups really intrigue me, in a major way other than Edge and Orton, and that's just because of I have no idea what we're going to see. We've talked about how ridiculous this greatest wrestling match of all time hype has been for the match, and really, like you said, kind of confused about why they felt the need to brand this match with that label. And another thing is, no matter what type of match they give us for Edge versus Orton, they're already doing it a disservice as far as it could be an awesome match. I mean, maybe on Sunday I'll watch that and think, wow, that really was one of the best matches I've ever seen. But to me, if you're really talking about one of the best matches of all time, it's already immediately disqualified because of the fact that it's pre-taped. Every other match that I put on my list of greatest matches of all time, hey, they were done right in front of me. They were done live, in front of an audience, but even if not an audience, I still saw it live, and those performers had to perform right then and there. It wasn't a situation where, like you said, they're doing multiple retakes and doing edits to make things look good. So to me, even that aspect eliminates it from any talk of, best match of all time, no matter how good it comes out being on Sunday. But talk to me a little bit more about, you mentioned that, Drew McIntyre was a guy that was kind of taking it as a challenge to make his match, his live match, better than Edge versus Orton. And the idea that maybe there's a little bit of a disservice being done to all the other competitors on the show, that they gave this greatest match of all time moniker to Edge and Orton, and all the production and edits that are going to be done to try to make this thing come off as good as it can be compared to the competitors that are going to be doing their thing there live on the pay-per-view on Sunday night.
Well, particularly as regards Drew McIntyre taking this as a challenge, I implore anyone listening to this to stick to the Sportskeeda YouTube and look up the interview that Drew McIntyre had with our colleague Rick Ucchino, who's been a guest on this podcast before, where he does cover quite a lot of ground on this. And even though he doesn't discuss it in too much depth, you can see that the moniker is something that he is aware of. Now I'm not going to in any way say that Drew McIntyre is the only man considering this a challenge, but the simple reality is, what's happened here is you have said to everyone who isn't Edge or Orton on this card, you cannot do better. You cannot steal this show. There are a lot of people who think they might just be able to. Drew McIntyre is someone like that. Sasha Banks is someone like that. Alexa Bliss is someone like that. Apollo Crews and Andrade are people like that. There are a high number of people not on this card who are very highly regarded within and without the WWE. I mentioned Daniel Bryan and AJ Styles as options. Kevin Owens, not on this card. Shinsuke Nakamura, not on this card. I think this card was built to be the spectacle it needs to be without detracting from the more technical aspects. And I think, unfortunately, that, yes, puts a lot of pressure on Edge and Orton, but I think there are a few people who have been underestimated by the WWE there and who might have something different to say about it.
And, I think from that aspect that maybe in just the last 5 minutes, this pay-per-view got a little bit more interesting to me than maybe I originally thought. So my interest is piqued a little bit more to tune in on Sunday and see kind of if anyone steps their game up, to maybe try to steal the show, knowing that, Edge and Orton have gotten all these production values and pre-records that, hey, everybody's a competitor and everybody wants to be the best. So, like I said, my interest in this show may have just increased just a little bit just within the past 5 or 6 minutes talking about it. So we shall see what we get on Sunday, and we encourage everybody to watch Backlash on the WWE Network, and I'm sure we'll be talking all about it on next week's show right here on the podcast. We want to thank you for listening this week. Make sure that you like or comment on this week's podcast video and subscribe to the Sportskeeda YouTube channel. While you're there, you can also make sure you subscribe to Tom's personal YouTube channel as well for even more wrestling news and notes. You can follow Tom on Twitter at Colohue, and you can follow me at Korey Gunz. And check out Sportskeeda.com for the latest wrestling news and articles. We want to thank you for joining us this week, and we will see you next time on the next edition of Dropkick DiSKussions.